You make a bunch of noise out here, so they have peace and quiet in here. Because there's no better sound than the squeak-free guarantee from Advantech Subflooring and Advantech Subfloor Adhesive.
Pete Yost here for the UnBuild It podcast. I'm the host for this week's episode entitled Tribute to Building Science Corporation. Of course, I'm here with my good buddy Jake Bruton.
I love the bumble on someone's name that you know.
I almost made it through the whole introduction, but not quite.
Yes, he did. And we're not doing it again. So who else is here?
Your name is pretty clear. Steve Basic.
Thank you. Appreciate being here.
So I'm taking the lead on this one because both Steve and I have kind of a special relationship to Building Science Corporation. But we thought it was really important if we had to pick out one firm or a couple of people that have done more to improve high-performance building and promoting building science in the building community, you gotta start with Joe Stiebrick and Betsy Pettit. Don't you think, Steve?
I agree. They're at the top of that pyramid.
And I had a career long before I was at Building Science Corporation starting in the year 2000. All that just means is that I several times thought I understood how buildings worked, but really didn't until I got to Building Science Corporation. And Steve, you started pretty early in your career with Joe and Betsy.
Yeah, I was a couple of years out of college, architecture school, when I started there.
So how did you get the position at?
So I got the job. Joe actually came to Wentworth, where I went to school, and gave a lecture. And Betsy was in the back of the room talking with a gentleman who was the department head that was a friend of mine at the time. And Betsy had talked about, we just got Building America, and Joe is coming down from Canada. We're starting this company, Building Science Corporation, and we need, some employees and architect and stuff like that. And he goes, I think I got somebody that you should meet. And he called me and set up the meeting, and I drove out to meet Betsy and Joe and got hired in their living room.
Rest is history, huh?
The rest is history.
When you're head of the department at Wentworth Institute of Technology and Architecture, why do you think he picked you out as appropriate for Building Science Corporation?
My whole time there, the whole 5 years, we became good friends, but more importantly, we didn't have a thesis program in Wentworth. But when I went through the handbook, there was this, it wasn't critical, it might have been called critical theory. It was a course, but it wasn't a course to be taught by teachers. It was a course that was I don't know what to call it, but it was a course for yourself.
Right. So sort of like an independent study
course. Yeah, exactly. And then that was tuned to be attached to a thesis. So I went, and when he was the department head, I said, "Hey, can I do this critical theory course?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "You got to pick out an advisor and somebody to work with you on that." And I said, "Okay, well, that's the second question. Do you want to do it?" And he goes, "Yeah, sure, let's do it." And so we did it. And so we got to know each other very well, because over that course of the year, it was a one-on-one class where I'd meet with him for like an hour a week. We'd talk about what I was doing and my thesis and all of that. So I did a true thesis project in a school that we didn't have one. So, and he was tied to this whole world too, because if you, do you guys know who Paolo Soleri was?
Yeah.
Right? So he was a student of Paolo Soleri and went and worked out at the Prescott, can't believe I don't remember the name of the place out there. Paolo Soleri's little world that he was building out in Prescott, Arizona.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Anyways, but I got the opportunity to meet Paolo Soleri once too, through him. It was really cool.
So what was it like to start at Building Science Corporation?
And what was your employee number?
I say number one, but there was a quasi woman that worked there for just a really.
She was kind of a woman, or she was kind of an employee, and she was a woman.
An employee, okay. But she was there. She was like a friend of Betsy trying to help out the situation, and then she just disappeared. So I see. So theoretically, she was their first employee, but she worked like.
If it helps, Joe refers to you as
she
their
works
first
as,
employee.
yeah. She left after 3 months, and she wasn't into the building science thing. She was trying to figure out.
So let's put some context on this. So this was 1991 that you started to work with them?
No, because I graduated in '94. This was probably like 96-ish, 95, 95, I think. Yeah.
So Joe and Betsy met at, or were actually married at one of the very first EBA conferences that was held in Boston, right?
Yeah,
and I think that was like 93.
Just before me. Yeah, that stuff was before me. They were still in Brookline. We were working in their basement office. I was the only employee to work there. Because when Stephanie, who got hired as the second employee, I remember her coming in for the interview, and we were already at the barn.
Okay.
So I was the only
In
employee
Westford.
I was the only employee that worked in the Brookline office.
And so Betsy Pettit is a registered architect.
Yes.
And Joe is a professional engineer.
At the time, he was a P-Eng, not a PE. So he was a licensed Canadian engineer, not an American engineer.
Right. But it's sort of like peanut butter and chocolate, right? Because the two of them together, in a whole bunch of ways, one's an architect, one's an engineer. One is like this incredibly charismatic speaker, and the other is a very good, in addition to being an architect of note, a really good administrator, right?
Yes.
And so the two of them together, there was a whole lot of like thermonuclear fusion going on.
Yeah, and you got to remember too that they had just gotten awarded the Building America contract, and everything that Joe was bringing to America wasn't aware of.
Yeah.
And so not only did he have to present it, get people to believe in it, but you had to find a way, how are people going to accept this stuff?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because at the time, we've been building for years the way we always did it. I'm a framer. I frame the way my dad did. And now Joe comes in and says, hey, let's question how you frame. And it's like you're blowing these years of traditional lineage of information. And Joe, all of a sudden,
So when you first started to do drawings for them, did you work with both Joe and Betsy in terms of reviewing the plans, in terms of continuous control layers?
Yeah, they were. But Betsy, because we had the Building America contract, if I remember correctly, she had a ton of stuff that she had to do to just sort that out.
Yeah.
Because you weren't there, Nathan wasn't there, so it was her and the whole Building America contract and graphics and stuff like that. So I worked pretty closely with Joe at the time, and Neil Moyer was. He was getting contracted to come in and out and do a bunch of different things. So I did a bunch of work with him. We did energy audits, and we would get contracts to go to, like I said, down to Mississippi, and I would travel with him down there, and we'd do stuff. And those that you don't know, I call Neil Moyer the godfather of the blower door. I know there's a lot of people that know the blower door, and not a lot of people know Neil. But if I had a blower door question and had one person to ask, it would be Neil, who I asked the question about the blower door.
Real quick, before we move on from you guys going to Mississippi, if you run into Steve at a bar, buy him a ginger ale and ask him to tell you blower dooring in the southern half of the United States.
Southern half
stories.
Of affordable housing, yeah. There was some crazy stuff in Rosedale and Manatee, and these are towns of like 400 people, 500 people, rural Mississippi.
You can't tell those stories here, but they are definitely worth the hearing.
Just going to get a haircut was a life-changing experience.
So, this is hard to talk about because I thought I understood how buildings worked when I was a builder and remodeler with my brothers. Then I go to the research center and I think, oh man, I didn't know anything about the way that buildings work. And I was there for 7 years. And then I ended up at Building Science Corporation and got my head handed to me all over again, the third time by Joe and Betsy.
You know what I find truly heartfelt about working at Building Science Corporation is, for me, it's kind of a two-headed monster, because And I think this is really hard to do, and we all experience people in our life that are like this. But Joe is certainly a wealth of knowledge, right, in building science. But Joe is equally a wealth in leadership as well as a wealth in knowledge. And that's really hard to do. Like, you can be an extremely smart person, but like Joe would say, if you don't know how to deal with that intelligence, how to pass it on, how to ensure that it continues,
How to even just make that sharing interesting.
and how to make it interesting. And I think that so for me, working there was certainly a life-changing experience.
Yeah.
And it was both working with Joe and Betsy. But I think if you ask me what the biggest takeaways, obviously I get to learn building science. I got to walk with Joe. But more importantly, Joe showed me the importance of information transfer and that it's not ours. And anything that we created, probably we didn't think up. It's just the next level of information of stuff that we've learned, and then somebody else is going to build upon that. So I called it in a recent post or something that we're curators of information, right? So that it's ours to curate. And I think Joe truly believed he was the curator of information, and that he was passing it on. But passing it on is the secret. And I tell everybody, Joe probably had the best mind when it came to taking the hardest complex things and just showing it to you as 2 + 2.
Yeah, distillation.
Right? Yeah. He took calculus and made it an addition problem.
Yeah.
Right? And so you would sit there and you'd be able to see it really clearly.
But I think the other, we said that this is a tribute to Building Science Corporation. I mean, there's no doubt that Joe had several businesses before Building Science Corporation, and it wasn't until the peanut butter and the chocolate got together.
Yes.
Because Betsy, as president of Building Science Corporation, took care of all the things that Joe was not particularly.
Well, I've often
good
said
at.
too that Betsy's probably the best employer you'd ever want to work for. Like you don't have the things that you would worry about being an employee. You didn't have those worries working with Betsy. She was extremely sharp and knew how to run a company and knew how to do that. And it's really interesting because not without going into like extreme depth, but you have a gentleman here that has a wealth of knowledge, believes he's a curator of knowledge and he should share it, and is willing to share it for free. And you have his
Somebody
other
else that knows
half
what they have
that's
built.
saying, we have to pay the electric bill. We have to pay these employees. We can't give it away for free. We have to figure out
Where's
how.
the happy medium?
Where is this happy medium? So that's their marriage, and
And they both, ended up, one an AIA fellow and the other an ASHRAE fellow.
very well deserved.
Both at the top of their game in their own professions.
Okay, so Steve's been there for a few years. You get hired on before Nathan, right? They found Nathan through you, or the other way around?
They found me through Nathan in a certain way. But I do have to tell you the story about how Nathan and Joe found
I think
each other.
Nathan found BSC, right?
Well,
I
what
can see
happened
that.
was
I met Nathan.
Nathan, who
Wait,
was
we should say Nathan Yost.
Yeah.
One of Peter's older brothers.
And he did a podcast with
He
us
did.
earlier
Go
this
back
year
to
on the COVID.
Number 3 or
Yeah,
something.
he's a pulmonologist.
Well, he's
at
a
heart.
pulmonary medical doctor. Did his postgraduate work at the Yale School of Medicine. Knows more about pulmonary human health and therefore indoor air quality as it impacts. He was always a frustrated builder. So he's got all these brothers in building industry.
What do you have to say, builder? Nathan was just always frustrated. Let's just go with that.
No, I'm not going to go there.
He doesn't listen.
So he said, "Hey, Peter, there's the Affordable Comfort Conference," which he didn't know what it meant. They're coming to town, and I think I'm going to go and see a bunch of the presentations. Who should I go see? And I said, well, let's take a look at the. And of course, Joe Stiebrick. Well, you got to go see Joe Stiebrick, and there was a couple other speakers there. So Nathan goes and sits down in the back of the room where Joe's doing a presentation, and like Joe's been talking for 5 minutes, Nathan's hands go up, and he has a question, and then another 5 minutes, and Nathan's hand go up and have a question, and Joe and his form like, "Who the hell are you?" He goes, "Oh, my name's Nathan Yost." And Joe goes, oh, geez. Well, that explains an awful lot. But when Joe found out that Nathan had access to all the medical literature related to human health and pulmonary function, he said, hey, Nathan, if you'll help me get access to that information, I'll be your conduit to understanding buildings. So for about a year, Joe would call Nathan and say, hey, I've got to go to Houston and look at a building. Want to go? And Nathan would go, hey, that's a great idea. And Joe, they did like a Vulcan mind meld or something so that Joe could get access to all the stuff that Nathan knew and vice versa. And that's when they hired Nathan to work at Building Science Corporation. So he was actually hired maybe days before I was. But he was the connection. Because Nathan knew that I was not ultimately all that happy at Building Green at the time. And it's because I'm a researcher at heart and not a journalist. And so Nathan, he said, I'm getting a little tired of hearing Joe and Betsy talk about what they need and could get from you, and a little tired of hearing about how you don't fit a Building Green. So let's just cut to the chase. And that's when I went to work at Building Science Corporation. And our first trip together was to Cleveland, Ohio, one day after 9/11.
Yeah, so we had to drive out and back because the
Everything was
airports
shut
weren't
down.
functioning. But we didn't really
First
want to
thing we ever
miss
did
the
together.
meeting and stuff.
I can't imagine driving from Boston to Cleveland with Peter.
It was,
He actually
Prior to
So
good
you want to know
quality
the funny
GPS.
thing is, he slept more than I did, if you can believe it.
Most of the way there.
I drove pretty much most of the way down and back, which is okay.
Okay, so then you guys and Nathan, who else is at BSC at this point?
well, so you can't talk about Building Science Corporation without talking about Coda Ueno.
Yep.
And, Coda
Coda's
is
still at BSC too.
still at BSC and just an amazing engineer.
I tell people, for those of you that don't know Coda, I have a simple way of explaining Coda. Coda is the closest human being I know to a computer.
We hope that he would take
I've
that.
sat through
It's-
two
it's-
presentations
yeah.
from him and thought, he knows more than me, more than I ever will, and he is doing a better job interpreting and explaining this than anything I've ever talked about,
But-
even like what the shape of my own hand is. Like
The process by which he maneuvers through life is incredible.
Well, it's really, one of the cool things about Coda is that he's a very accomplished pianist. But I have seen him with a keyboard doing Excel spreadsheets pretty much the same way he plays piano.
Okay.
It's crazy.
He's just unbelievably, his
In
brain
tune.
is connected to his hands in an amazing way.
Yeah. By no means are we trying to insult Coda. By no means. He's
these are all terms of endearment.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
exceptional. But one of the coolest things I think about working at BSC was working with Betsy and Joe, but it was everybody else that walked in the door too. As far as employees, I got to meet Coda, Peter, Nathan, Stephanie. I worked with Stephanie the longest because she was the employee right after
What's
me.
Stephanie's last name?
Finnegan.
I don't know Stephanie. I've never met her.
So
Graphic artist.
she's the one that put all the builder's guides together,
That was her
water
project,
management
yeah.
guide, all of the graphic stuff. If we put out pamphlets and stuff.
Which, if you're going to do the graphic art for BSC, you have to know more about building science than most builders, probably.
Yeah.
Like,
But we
that's
sat
not
right
a- that's
across
not
from
a-
each other.
tell
So
me
I
how
did
this
the base
should look.
drawing and she colorized it and stuff. So we were like, should I make it this color or that color? Which was really great because I get complimented on my graphics all the time. But a lot of it was this birth of, we're trying to put out information that nobody's ever seen and trying to, it's not a drawing necessarily for construction. It's a drawing we're asking people to learn from.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
so they had to be drawn a certain way, like
Yeah.
you said. And so I got to learn a lot on the graphic side of how to put a set of drawings together and what should that detail really look like, right? By working there. But going back to it is, aside from all the other people, Gus Hyendegord, John Straub, John Straub's buddy Chris, I forget his last name.
Chris Schumacher.
Chris Schumacher. All these people that would come in the door, you
And
were
share knowledge.
and share knowledge. And I mean, Gus Handegord was, for those of you that don't know, was one of Joe's mentors. right? That wrote the building science for northern climate or something.
For cold climate.
For
Yeah.
cold climate.
Yeah.
And
But so that, to me, it's not just that Joe and Betsy built Building Science Corporation. They built a building science community. When you talk about all the people that work through the door, Joe's attitude was, if you are passionate about buildings, I'm your brother, right? I mean, that's their general approach.
And come and share.
Oh, absolutely.
Come and share. We're going to have a conference. We're going to have this. Come. We're having a
Okay,
meeting.
so let's
Come
talk
in.
about summer camp then.
Well, I was going to say, and then, for them to build the community literally around a once-a-year event, the Building Science Symposium.
Westford. Yeah. How's
Yeah,
it phrased?
It's the Westford Symposium, but it was also called the Building Science Symposium. When they did that the first time, they didn't know what it was going to become. Joe just said, "Hey, I want to get together with some of my best friends." Because the other thing about Joe and Betsy is there's not a whole lot of separation between their professional lives and their personal lives. So when people come, it's like, "Hey, stay with us," and it's basically sort of a big party, but the heart of it is education, learning from other people. And that grew from, the first year probably was less than 50 people.
Yeah, it's probably something like that, 50, 60
And
people.
now it's
500-600.
Well,
Yeah.
it's grown.
Well,
Betsy
and
always
it's
said-
at a limit, right? Because you could have 2,000 people there if you chose to.
But I remember when Betsy said the limit was going to be like 250, and then she said it was going to be 500, and Joe just keeps inviting people and inviting people.
And so let's talk about how summer camp, everybody calls it summer camp.
Yeah.
Summer camp works. I've been once and then missed a couple years and then COVID.
Yeah.
And so I hope it kicks back up at some point. Fingers crossed. It's 3 days.
Yep.
Everyone's in one room listening to one presentation at a time. And it's, some of the presentations are the whole morning or the whole afternoon. Some of them are an hour. Some of them are, there's 4 presentations one afternoon, things like that. But everybody gets the same information. And then at the end of each day, Joe goes, "See you in my backyard. We're going to have a barbecue."
Yep.
And they have the entire thing turns into an evening party where everybody there sits around and picks apart what was talked about that day and discusses it and builds takeaways and
Well, the best food, the best booze, and the best conversations you'll ever imagine. And so, the rigor that they showed in their publications was coupled with just riotous investigation and education at things like the Science Symposium. So when you talk about a blend of all the right ways to do hard science, but just ripping fun and really
get
passionate.
2 glasses of whiskey and everybody so that they'll talk to each other without regard for people's feelings.
And that they built a whole community around that. It's really it's an amazing thing. So the other thing about it is their website, because buildingscience.com.
Way to snag the perfect website name too. Buildingscience.com.
Yeah.
It's like to everybody else.
But I used to say to Joe and Betsy, like, how do you resist the pressure to commercialize this? I mean, they've had manufacturers crawling down their throats and in their back doors saying, let us support the website. And Joe and Betsy have just said, no, we're going to keep this as an information resource.
Yep.
And I know that Joe doesn't particularly like it, but I start a lot of presentations by saying that, Joe is a building science socialist, because, his attitude is build the free information, because we shouldn't be, it's information. We have to make sure that's available to everybody.
Curators,
Much better than social science or socialist. Yeah, that's much better. Curator. I get into more trouble with Joe than you do, I think.
Well, I think it's hard for you to live in Vermont and not use the word socialist on a regular basis.
People's Republic of Vermont.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But so, there's just so many,
And me without my Bernie Sanders mittens. Sorry.
So if you haven't spent a lot of time on buildingscience.com, it is one of the all-time key
I always tell
resources.
everybody, go there and read it. And then read it again so you can understand it.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Because there is that much information where if you read it the first time, you're not doing the website justice.
So full disclosure, what I do is I read it and then I print it and then I come back to it in a couple days.
Wow.
Because I'll forget to go back to make sure that I understand. There's on my desk right now in my office is an article about phase change materials that I'm trying to understand, that I still don't understand, but I'm trying to understand.
And then, very interestingly, some years ago, as part of Joe's relationship with ASHRAE, he started to do his ASHRAE Insights, which, I'm sure there are engineer members of ASHRAE that just roll over in their beds or their graves because he's such an irreverent writer. But it's also probably the most popular part of any of the publications ASHRAE has.
Yep. They also do 2-day learning events as well,
Yep.
which was my introduction to him. I think you told me right when we first started hanging out, like if I was looking for some place to catch stuff that wasn't a conference, and I went to one of their 2-day things, and I was just like, holy cow, this was like the biggest information dump that I'd had in a 2-day learning environment ever.
There's I just found this the other day, stumbled across it, Joe doing a presentation, I think in New Zealand a couple years ago. And I thought, yeah, it'd be kind of good to see Joe with the attitude like, there's not a whole lot probably I can learn from Joe at this point. And it was so embarrassing because, and it's not that, this is what you were getting to, Steve. It's not that Joe's just brilliant. It's the distillation. He has a way of, and it's not just taking complicated concepts and making them simple. It's the way he talks into a deeper topic. He knows exactly where he's going, even though it seems like he's wandering. That's one of the cool things. So I pulled up this presentation from New Zealand and got sucked in and immediately started to learn things that I thought I understood. So yeah, we were both really well. We wouldn't have met each other first of all if we hadn't been both at Building Science Corporation, but we also would never have learned nearly as much as we have about buildings.
Well, a little kind of behind the scenes, couple things. Like, there's things Joe tells people, and then there's things like you get to learn, right? Like, I remember we were doing this one building, and Joe was talking about he thought he knew where the leak was going to be and what the problem was and stuff, but we couldn't get the building to leak fast enough in the time frame, and we were left alone. He goes, "I'll make this building leak, damn it!" So he went and got one of those garden sprayer jugs that's in line in the garden hose. We added a little bit of soap, sprayed the wall because the soap acts like a surfactant. The thing leaked in about 3 minutes, exactly where he said it was going to leak. Right. So we found the leak. We just accelerated the testing process a little by making it a little easier.
Which I wonder how many hours you have to stand watching a window not leak before you're like, I can fix this. I can make this leak quicker.
Or you're just like driving to, we would do a lot of building investigations, and I was fortunate to tag along. And on the way, he'd explain what the problem is. It's like, okay, we're not even at the building yet. You got a little bit of information. And then it's like we would walk in the door. I remember we were walking in the store. It was a public school, and he's asked the guy, do you operate the building under a positive or negative pressure? And it's like, the guy's like, oh, definitely negative pressure. The building's totally negative pressure. We always operate under that. And Joe's like, yeah, pay attention when you walk in the front door. The front door, you couldn't even push it open. The building was so overly positive. and so Joe, he's asking questions because he's not only trying to get information, but he's trying to validate how well does this guy know his building. Right. Like, is this somebody that he was just amazing, because you're walking in and not only is Joe doing a building investigation, but he's really interviewing and qualifying this guy as, is he worthy to be talking to about this problem?
Yeah.
Like, does he understand what's happening? And you're just sitting there going, yeah, this is just way too cool.
Okay. So that first seminar that I went with Joe, one of my biggest takeaways had to do with business and not building science. And I still use it almost every time I visit a project. if I'm there to look like problem-solving stuff, investigations. And he explained a specific instance where he knew what the problem was going to be. And he said it was a large government building, and they were paying him a lot of money to be there to take care of it. And he had figured out what it was within like 30 seconds of being there, and still spent the whole day before saying, I think this is what the
I know where you're
idea,
going with
with the
this.
idea that they'll get pissed off at you if you can solve it in 30 seconds and they're paying you a lot of money. But if it takes all day, you worked for it. You
But
earned
there's
it.
a line that goes with that. Do you know what it is?
No.
Like, you can't get the dough if you don't do the show.
Oh, okay. Yep, that's exactly what it is.
Right? You got to show them and that, yeah, we're thinking about this and we're doing this and all of that.
But that's a good business acumen takeaway. Like,
Well,
the
I think he
idea
was
that-
thorough too, right? He
Yeah.
was always thorough.
Oh,
Like,
yeah.
He knew what the problem was, but he would still validate and making sure that that was a problem. And yeah, it was just it was life changing, certainly.
So in positive driving forces for our industry and the overall good.
Well, think about it. I mean, aside from Joe and Betsy, who in the last 50 years made the industry change direction in any way?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I was going to say, I
Not
can think of
manufacturers.
Yeah, I can think of a lot of great people, all of whom were either going to the summer camp or presenting there. But
I mean,
Did-
he's
did
one of
they
the few
have the-
people. He's one of the few people in our industry that you can identify him by his first name.
yeah,
So
Yeah.
that says something.
No.
Yeah.
Right there. I heard Joe say this. People
Right.
know who Joe is.
yeah. So and Joe would be the first to admit that it's a community that has built a base of knowledge. But there's nobody besides Building Science Corporation that's had that much impact on the industry. It's really hats off, you know?
Exactly.
That's the way it
Exactly.
works.
Thank you. Right? We're saying thank you. That's
Yeah.
the whole point of this.
Yeah.
Thanks, Joe and Betsy.
And now, well, second generation too, right? I mean, I remember when Christine was running around the barn with my kids, like 5 or 6 years old,
Yeah.
running around at Christmas and Thanksgiving parties and stuff. And now she's
Of course, we're talking about Christine Williamson, Joe's
Building Science
Building
Fight
Science
Club.
Fight Club on
on
Instagram, but yeah, and my daughter following in my footsteps and going to architecture school and stuff. So it's,
She's not in school anymore.
well, I'm saying going to architecture.
She's
working.
still in school.
She's still in school. But I think that's also testament to,
Yeah.
all that stuff comes down out of the Joe and Betsy family tree.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
Here, here.
BuildingScience.com.
Okay, thank you for listening to the podcast today or watching it if you're on YouTube. If you're on YouTube, click like, click subscribe. You can hit the little bell button so it will remind you or warn you when we publish one. Leave us a comment. Let us know if you disagree with anything we said. I don't think this is one there's anything to disagree with.
I'm just gonna. I don't usually butt in, but I'm gonna leave you with this.
Do we agree with that? That he doesn't usually butt in?
He's on a roll.
As an ode to Joe, I think everybody out there, if you have information, remember that you're a curator of it, not an owner of it. In an ode to Joe, pass that information on. Whether it's a success or a failure, we all need to learn from each other. And I think, Joe is the number one leader and set that example for us to follow.
I
Well
agree.
said. Yeah, well said.
Okay, we're going to leave it at that. Thanks for listening.